Hi everyone, welcome to this Batchline tutorial video. Today we're going to be looking at the new Batchline dashboard, specifically the right hand tab labeled stock and returns, and we're going to be having a look at how to configure this tab. So the same way that we clicked these buttons to configure these tabs, click up here on stock config to configure this tab. So you can move this around just like we can with the other ones. I'm just going to quickly go through this. So the first piece of configuration is the oldest data of interest. So if there's anything where we're looking at data from all time, what does that mean? Does that mean maybe we're just interested in the last 5 years? Maybe we're interested in the last 20 years. The next selection is, do we want to look at today, yesterday, past 7 days, past 30 days, this week, this month, this year, or all time? If we change that to all time, Batchline's going to go off and collect that data. And now we can see the top 15 titles by sale value in all of time for cookery. And we can see that that's Rick Stein at Home. Again, we can hover over these and have a closer look at that data. Do we want the default graphic to be title performance or category performance? And then we're on to the more complex selections. So in this part of Batchline, we're going to try and help bookshops to identify items that can be returned and maybe should be returned. So these are the parameters which are going to define that these next two, the returns window and what do we define as not selling. So we're going to try and define titles that we think are not selling, and then we're also going to define a returns window. So if we have titles which we think are not selling, and then where we have a goods in event which is in this window and we have a publication date which is in the window, then we're going to say that book consider this book for return. Not that you should return it, but that it can be considered for return and you should be able to return it. And then we've got this other tick box, which is, do you want to include your core stock in the returns? So there's this concept in Batchline of core stock. So if we go into stock detail here, we've got this little box here, core stock. You may have a book, I don't know, something like Orwell's 1984 that you always want to have a copy of. Maybe it hasn't sold for a long time, but you want to have a copy of it because you know that it probably will sell at some point. If you don't want to show your core stock as suggested returns, you can untick this box. It will be unticked by default. If you're not interested in that, then we can tick that box. The defaults here are going to be general industry standard. So we will consider a book eligible for return if it's been published at least 3 months ago. Anything that hasn't been published, anything that was published more recently than that, is not going to be eligible for a return as per standard industry practice. But you can change that if you want to. And then again, we'll only consider something to be returnable, a book to be returnable, if we received it less than 15 months ago. Anything that we received before then is not considered eligible for return. But again, we can change that if we want to by, typing in this box or using these little arrow keys. So that's our returns window. And then how are we going to define what we think is not selling? So the first choice we have here is never sold and had for at least 3 months. So if we only received a title 3 weeks ago and we've never sold it, don't consider that as not selling. We've only had it for 3 weeks. That doesn't count as not selling. In this case, if we've had it for at least 3 months and we've never sold it, then it can be considered as not selling. So again, we can configure that. Maybe we think it's more reasonable to hang on to everything for at least 5 months. And then we have two different settings for paperbacks and hardbacks. So generally, actually, for this purposes, anything that isn't a hardback will be considered a paperback, even though there are other bindings. This is because a lot of bookshops don't want to hold on to expensive hardbacks for as long as they would hold on to a paperback that they might want to return. So we'll say if I have a paperback that I haven't sold in 7 months, say we're going to consider that as a book that isn't selling. But for hardbacks, I'm going to be a bit stricter, and I don't want to hold on to anything which I haven't sold in 5 months potentially. So we can configure those two bits there. And this is going to define what we think is not selling and then what we can return. Then we've got this dead stock configuration where we're trying to identify something which we just think it really hasn't sold in a long time and we can't return it. So we don't have any goods in events which fall within our returns window, and we haven't sold it for some period of time. So in this case, the default will be 12 months. So anything we can't return and we've not sold for 12 months, we're going to consider as dead stock in this configuration. So again, we can change that. So that's probably enough for now. This is going to define what we see in these consider in not selling and consider return, and we'll have a deeper look into that in the next video. Okay, thanks a lot then. Bye bye.